There is one food sitting in my pantry right now that will outlast me. It will outlast my children. And if it's stored the way I'm going to show you, it will very likely outlast my grandchildren too. It never spoils. Not in a year, not in 10 years, not in 100. You could seal it up today, forget about it for the rest of your life. Hand it down to someone who isn't even born yet, and they could open that jar and eat from it like the day it was made. And that food is honey. Raw, unfiltered honey, the kind we pull straight from the hive, the kind most folks have never actually tasted, because what sits on the store shelf with that name on the label is, in a lot of cases, not really the same thing at all, and I'll tell you exactly why before we're done. I want to start by saying something plain, because I don't like wasting you time, and I don't like dressing things up. Honey is the only food I know of that, left alone and kept dry, simply does not go bad. Everything else in my cellar has a clock on it. The dried corn, the canned beans, the cured meat, the apple butter, all of it is in a slow race against time, and time always wins eventually. But honey doesn't play by those rules. It sits outside of them. And once you understand why, you start to understand a whole way of living that most people gave up without ever knowing what they were trading away. Let me give you the proof first, because I know how it sounds. Archaeologists, the people who dig up the old buried places of the world, have gone down into tombs in Egypt that were sealed more than 3,000 years ago. Sealed before this country existed. Sealed before most of the history in our school books even started. And inside those tombs, in clay jars, they found honey. Not rotted, not turned to poison, honey. Still honey after 3,000 years in the dark. Now, I'm not telling you to go eat something that old, but I am telling you that a food which can survive 3,000 years sealed in a jar is a food worth understanding, worth keeping, worth handing down. Because that is not luck. That is not an accident. There is a reason honey behaves this way, and the reason is built right into what it is. So let me explain why honey never spoils, in plain words, the way my grandfather explained it to me when I was small enough to sit on an overturned bucket and watch him work the frames. 3 things keep honey from going bad, and they all work together. The first thing is water, or rather the lack of it. Spoiling, rotting, going off, whatever word you want to use, is mostly the work of tiny living things. Bacteria, yeast, mold. You can't see them, but they're everywhere, and they're the reason your bread goes green and your meat turns. But those little creatures need water to live and to multiply. They have to have it. And honey is one of the driest, sweet things in all of nature. By the time the bees are finished with it, ripe honey holds only about 17 or 18 parts of water out of 100. The rest is sugar. And that brings me to the second thing. The second thing is the sugar itself and the way it behaves. Honey is so packed with sugar that it's almost crowded. There's barely room for anything else. Now here is the part that's almost like a trick of nature. When a bacterium, one of those tiny rotting creatures, lands in honey, the honey pulls the water right out of it, right through its own skin. The sugar is so thirsty, so hungry for water, that it draws the moisture out of any living thing that touches it and leaves it dried up and dead. Folks who study this call it osmosis, but you don't need the fancy word. Just picture it. A drop of mold spore falls into the honey, and instead of growing, it gets wrung out like a wet rag and it dies. Honey doesn't just resist the things that cause spoiling, it kills them. It defends itself. And the third thing is the bees. The bees themselves add something to it. When a bee gathers nectar from a flower and carries it home in her body, she mixes it with her own juices with an enzyme she makes inside her. And that enzyme does something remarkable. It causes the honey to make tiny, tiny amounts of the same thing your grandmother poured on a scraped knee. Hydrogen peroxide. Just a trace, just a whisper of it, but it's enough to keep the honey clean from the inside out. The bee is, in a way, a tiny pharmacist, building a medicine and a preservative into every drop she makes, without ever being taught, without ever knowing she's doing it. Honey is also slightly sour, slightly acidic, more than most people would ever guess from the taste. And that sourness is one more thing the rotting creatures can't stand. So you put all three together. Almost no water. Sugar so thick it strangles anything that lands in it. A built-in trace of medicine from the bee herself. And what you end up with is a food that simply will not die. That's not magic. That's not superstition. That's just the honest truth of how honey is made. And it's been true for as long as there have been bees and flowers, which is to say a great deal longer than there have been people to wonder about it. Now I want to talk to you about the part of the title that probably caught your eye. Why you can't really find this in the store. Why what I keep in my pantry is not the same as what most folks are buying. Because this is where it stops being a pleasant fact about bees and starts being something you actually need to understand for your own household. When we harvest honey here, it goes from the hive into the jar, and almost nothing happens in between. We let it settle, we strain out the bits of wax and the occasional bee leg, the things you don't want to eat, and that's all. What ends up in the jar is exactly what the bees made. It's cloudy sometimes, it's got tiny specks of pollen in it, real pollen, the dust of 100 flowers. It might be thick, it might be thin, it might be dark as molasses or pale as straw, depending on what was blooming when the bees were working. It is alive, in a manner of speaking, it's whole. Now here is what happens to a great deal of the honey that ends up on a store shelf. First, it often gets heated. Heated up hot, much hotter than a bee would ever make it, so that it pours easy and looks pretty and clear in the bottle and won't turn solid on the shelf. But that heat, while it makes the honey look nice for selling, it cooks out some of the very things that made the honey special. It quiets down those gentle enzymes the bee worked so hard to put in. Then a lot of it gets filtered, not just strained the way we strain it, but pushed through fine filters under pressure that pull out the pollen, all of it. And here's a thing worth chewing on. The pollen is part of how you can prove where honey actually came from. Take the pollen out, and you've taken out the honey's fingerprints. You've made it so nobody can easily tell what flowers it came from, or what country it came from, or whether it's even mostly honey at all. And that last part is the part that ought to bother you, because there is a great deal of money in honey. And where there's money, there are people willing to cheat. For years now, there have been folks caught taking cheap sugar syrups made from corn or from rice, syrups that cost a fraction of what real honey costs, and mixing them in, stretching the honey, watering down the truth. Some of it isn't even honey at all by the time it reaches a bottle with the word honey printed on the front. There have been real cases, big ones, where shipments were stopped and seized at the border, where honey was being run through one country and relabeled as if it came from another, dodging the rules, dodging the inspectors, all to sneak cheap, fake honey onto shelves at the price of the real thing. They even have a name for it now. They call it honey laundering, like washing dirty money, except they're washing the truth out of a jar. So when I tell you that what I keep is not the same as what's in the store, I'm not bragging and I'm not exaggerating. I mean it as plainly as I can. A lot of what gets sold has been heated until it's a shadow of itself, filtered until its history is erased, and in too many cases, stretched with syrup that no bee ever touched. The real thing, the whole thing, the kind that genuinely never spoils because all of its natural defenses are still intact, that has quietly become a thing you have to go looking for. You have to find a beekeeper. You have to know what you're buying. The store stopped being the place to find it, not because anyone made a grand announcement, but because cheaper and prettier and faster pushed the real thing right off the shelf. That's the honest version of how something gets, let's say, banished. Not with a law, with a market that rewards the fake over the true. Now let me get practical, because I don't want to leave you with just a story. I want to leave you with something you can use. The first thing I want to teach you is this, and it's the thing that confuses people more than anything else. When your honey turns thick, when it goes grainy, when it sets up hard and pale and cloudy in the jar, that is not spoiling. I want to say that again, because I've watched good honey get thrown in the trash over this. When honey crystallizes, when it goes solid and sugary, it has not gone bad. It is doing exactly what good, raw, honest honey is supposed to do. It's just the sugars settling, gathering together, the way water turns to ice, except it happens slow and on its own. Real honey, raw honey, will almost always do this in time. In fact, if your honey never, ever sets up, never gets grainy, stays perfectly clear and runny for years on end, you might ask yourself, why? That clearness can be a sign it was cooked and filtered hard, or worse. And the fix, when honey crystallizes, is the gentlest thing in the world. You set the jar in a bowl of warm water, not boiling, mind you, warm, like bath water, like you'd give a baby, and you let it sit, and you stir it now and again, and slow as you please, it turns back to liquid gold. The reason you keep it gentle is the same reason we don't heat it hard in the first place. Too much heat ruins the good in it. So you coax it, you don't cook it. A little patience, and that hard jar is pourable again, and not one bit of it was wasted. Now, how do you store it so it lasts the way I promised? It's simpler than you'd think, and it's mostly about keeping the one enemy of honey away from it. And the one enemy is water. Remember, honey stays good because it's so dry. So your whole job is to keep it dry. Keep it sealed. Keep that lid on tight, because honey, being so thirsty, will actually pull moisture right out of the air if you let it. And if it pulls in too much water, then those defenses start to weaken and it can begin to ferment. So a tight lid is most of the battle. Glass is best, a good glass jar with a lid that seals. Keep it somewhere with a steady temperature, out of the hot sun, but you do not need to put it in the icebox. In fact, the cold of an icebox just makes it crystallize faster. Room temperature, sealed, dry, out of the light. That's all. Do that and there is no expiration date on it that you'll ever live to see. Let me tell you about the ways we actually use it, because in a home like ours, honey is not just something sweet to spread on bread, though it is surely good for that. It earns its keep a dozen ways over. It's our sweetener, first and foremost. We don't run to the store for bags of white sugar. The bees make our sweetness for us, right out behind the house. It goes in tea, it goes in baking, it goes over warm biscuits, it goes in the children's milk on a cold morning. And because it's so much sweeter than plain sugar, a little of it goes a long way, so a jar lasts. But it's also been our medicine for as long as anyone in my family can remember. And here I want to be careful and honest with you, because I won't tell you tales. Honey has a real, true gentleness to it when it comes to a sore throat or a nagging cough. A spoonful, plain or stirred into warm water with a little lemon, has soothed more scratchy throats in this house than I could count. And there's good reason behind it that the doctors themselves will tell you. It coats, it soothes, and those natural defenses I told you about, that trace of cleanliness the bee builds in, they're part of why. We've used it on the skin, too. Long, long before there were tubes of ointment at the store, people reached for honey on a small burn or a scrape, and there was wisdom in that, because the very same things that keep honey from spoiling, the way it pulls water out of bacteria and keeps a wound clean, those work on the skin, too. To this day, there are honeys used in proper medicine for exactly that purpose. But hear me clearly, because this is where I have to be the honest neighbor and not the salesman. Honey is a help. It is not a miracle, and it is not a doctor. A bad burn, a deep wound, an infection that's spreading, a cough that won't quit, or a fever that climbs, those need a real doctor. And I'd be doing you wrong if I let you think a jar of honey takes the place of one. Use the old wisdom for the small things, the sore throats and the scratches, and use good sense to know when something is bigger than that. The old ways and the doctor are not enemies. The smartest folks I know use both, each for what it's good at. And there is one warning about honey that I will never let pass, because it matters more than anything else I've said, and too few people know it. Never, ever give honey to a baby. Not a taste, not a dab on a sore gum, not a drop in the bottle. Not to any little one under a year old. I know it seems like the most natural, gentle thing in the world, and that's exactly why this catches good, loving parents off guard. But there is something that can live quietly in honey, harmless to you and me and to any older child, that a tiny baby's body is not yet strong enough to handle. It can make an infant very, very sick. So the rule is simple, and the rule has no exceptions. No honey for the first year. Once a child has had their first birthday, their body has grown able to handle it just fine, and they can enjoy it for the rest of their life. But that first year, keep it away from them entirely. If you remember nothing else I say today, remember that, because it could save a life. Now I want to step back from the practical for a moment and talk about why all of this matters, beyond just the honey itself. Because honey to me is really a lesson. It's a teacher. And the lesson is about a way of living that we have very nearly forgotten. Think about what honey really is. It is food that takes care of itself. It asks nothing of you. It needs no icebox running on electricity, no freezer humming day and night, no factory, no chemicals dripped in to keep it, no date stamped on the bottom telling you to throw it out and buy more. It just keeps, quietly, patiently, for as long as you need it to. And in that, it is the very picture of the kind of independence my people have always valued. The kind where you are not at the mercy of the store, not at the mercy of the power company, not at the mercy of a supply line that could break tomorrow and leave the shelves empty. A jar of honey on your shelf is a small piece of true security. It is food that will be there for you no matter what happens out in the world. And I think that's a big part of why this knowledge faded. Not because it stopped being true. Honey works exactly the same today as it did 3,000 years ago in those Egyptian jars. The bees didn't change, the flowers didn't change. What changed is us. We were offered convenience, and we took it, and we didn't read the fine print on what we were giving up. We traded the whole, living, lasting food for the pretty, clear, cheap one in the squeeze bottle, and most folks never even knew a trade was happening. We forgot how to keep bees. We forgot that crystallized honey is good honey. We forgot to read past the word on the label. A whole way of providing for yourself gone in the generation or two. Not because anyone took it from us by force, but because we set it down and walked away and forgot where we'd left it. But here's the good news, and it's the reason I make these videos. None of it is truly lost. It's just waiting. The bees are still out there. The knowledge is still here, in homes like mine, in the memories of old folks, in the simple facts I've laid out for you today. You don't have to keep bees yourself to benefit from this, though plenty of people are finding their way back to it, and there's deep satisfaction in it if you ever feel called. But even if you never own a hive, you can find a beekeeper near where you live. You can buy the real thing, raw and unfiltered, straight from the hands that harvested it. You can keep a jar on your shelf the right way. You can know that no matter what the year brings, you have a food that will not fail you, will not rot, will not run out of time. Start with one jar, that's all. Find a real one from a real beekeeper and put it on your shelf, sealed and dry, the way I showed you. Let it sit there. Let it crystallize if it wants to. And now you'll know that's a good sign and not a bad one. Use it for your tea, for your sore throats, for your baking. And every time you reach for it, remember that you're holding something the modern world tried to replace with a cheap copy and very nearly succeeded. You're holding the real thing, the thing that lasts. Because that's really what all of this is about. It was never just about honey. It's about remembering that the old ways weren't backward, they were wise. The people who came before us, with no electricity and no factories and no stores on every corner, they figured out how to feed themselves, heal themselves, and provide for their families in ways that lasted, in ways that didn't depend on anything but their own knowledge and the gifts of the land around them. And honey is the proof of it, sitting right there in the jar, a food that never spoils, made by tiny creatures, gathered by patient hands, kept by people who understood something we're only now beginning to remember. So go and find your jar, keep it well, hand it down someday, and the next time someone tells you that the modern way is always the better way, you just think of that honey in the Egyptian tomb, 3,000 years old and still good, and you'll know better. If this was the kind of old knowledge you've been hungry for, the kind that got quietly set aside and nearly forgotten, then stay with me here. There's a great deal more of it where this came from, and I aim to bring it back to you one piece at a time. Subscribe, and we'll keep remembering the old ways together, because some of the most important lessons we ever had are the ones we let ourselves forget.